We've all heard them, the quiet whispers, the offhand jokes, the loaded labels. But what if the greatest harm isn't the illness itself, but the misunderstanding that surrounds it? Mental illness is not a failure of faith. It's not a flaw in character, and it's not something you can always see from the outside. In this episode, Dr. Kelly Holder, a Chief Wellness Officer, helps us confront the myths, unpack the science, and explore how harmful words and assumptions isolate those who are already hurting. Because healing begins when we change how we speak. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second installment of our mental health awareness series. We're going to jump right into this engaging conversation with Dr. Kelly Holder. Let me bring her on. Dr. Holder, thank you so very much for being with us today. I love the glasses.
Thank
Um, uh, Thank you so much for being with us today. Before we start, just tell us a little bit about you before we begin.
so I'm Kelly Holder. I am a clinical psychologist and a health psychologist by training, which means I've gotten training to help individuals who are dealing with health or medical-like challenges and support their mental health. Over the last 10 years of my career, I've spent it supporting individuals who work in healthcare in particular. I had the opportunity of starting and leading an office of counseling for medical students, and that grew into caring for folks in medical training, residents, our physicians and faculty and staff. And I currently hold the position of Chief Wellbeing Officer for the Warren Alpert Medical School at Brown University.
Awesome. Well, listen, Dr. Holder, thank you for joining us. I want to maximize your time. So let's sort of begin, if you don't mind, with the basics, right? What are some of the common misunderstandings or myths you encounter about mental health?
Yeah, the two main myths that I hear about a lot are almost in direct contradiction of each other. I hear a lot of people talking about mental health in terms of like it's not my problem. It's something that happens to those people using stigmatizing language and talking about others. And as if mental illness and mental health challenges and conditions don't impact all of us. On the other hand, I also hear folks really over-identifying with mental illness and saying that they're flawed or something is terribly wrong with them because they struggle with either mental illness or a mental health condition or challenge of some kind.
Sure. In terms of one of the most persistent beliefs is that mental illness somehow equates or is equated to weakness, right? Why is this idea about mental illness being equated to weakness so harmful? And how does it affect people's willingness sometimes to even get help?
Yeah, this is a common and a persistent belief, as you said in your question. The challenge with it is that we know statistically speaking, 1 out of 5 individuals within the US, Americans, suffer from a mental illness of some kind.
Yeah.
And this does not even include mental health challenges, conditions, other life events that create some sort of change or struggle within caring for our emotions and psychological health. And so this myth is really harmful because we are all impacted by these things. It's something that is pervasive. It's part of our human condition and human experience. And so when we think about it this way, it really does stop folks from reaching out, for asking for help, and doing the things that all of us really need to do in terms of caring for ourselves much better.
Yeah. Many people use words like crazy or unstable or emotional in everyday conversation, right? So, how do some of these labels sort of shape public perception and further isolate sometimes those who may be struggling?
Yeah. We all know that our words matter. The way we speak matters. And oftentimes we don't really understand why it matters. There is something that happens within us when we hear certain words. We are triggered emotionally and behave a certain way. For example, if you hear someone starting to talk about wrinkled, bald, tired, lethargic, right? We start thinking thoughts about aging and getting old, although we have not used the word old at all. And so when we use words like crazy, unstable, emotional, we have gut reactions, emotional and psychological reactions that we can't even pinpoint. And some of those are based in how people have talked about and stigmatized mental health in the past. And so we create these images in our mind, even in a flash, that causes us to react in such a way that pushes away from treatment, pushes away from the goodness and the things that we need to do for ourselves. And more than that, helps us push away from other people and disrupts relationships. And
Sure.
so the way we talk about things matters because of the changes that happens within us, but the changes that happens in connection and being with other people.
Yeah. So, Dr. Holder, thank you for that. And I think that's very important for us to understand how we talk about individuals who are struggling with mental health conditions is very important. But even beyond the casual language, people with mental health conditions are often reduced to their diagnosis. Why is labeling so damaging? And how is it that we can sort of um, how is it that we can sort of challenge it?
Yeah. The way I like to think about it is that as human beings, we are very complex. There are lots of
Mhm.
pieces about us, about our experience, about who we are, and none of us want to be labeled as one experience. While I like wearing cool glasses, right?
Hmm.
I don't know that I want people walking around calling me the glasses lady. I don't know. And even though that's not stigmatizing, I don't know that I'd want that. And so even more so, we do not want to pick out one piece of a person's human experience and use that as a way to describe them. And so being a cool glass lady is neutral for me. It doesn't make me upset, but I am so much more than a person who wears cool glasses, right? And so even especially when we're talking about mental health or challenges, we don't want to identify people by that one thing. And with that, when we do that and reduce an individual to that one thing, we're also saying that everything else about their existence does not matter.
Sure.
That this one thing is the defining thing and is the way that we need to see them, which is also another myth around mental health challenges and mental illness. Individuals who have some struggles around mental illness are complete individuals who have beauty and experience life and have gifts and other things to offer the world. So, definitely, we don't want to reduce them to one piece of their existence, not in that way.
Sure. So, in talking about, of course, because this is a faith community, in talking about our faith communities, right? Um, Sometimes we like to avoid having open discussions about mental health altogether, right? Why do you think the silence in our faith communities is so prevalent? I'm sorry for putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
And with that silence, what are the messages that maybe are not intended, but what are the messages that are being sent by our silence?
Yeah. I believe the science silence is based in fear, and the fear has multiple parts. But one fear I believe is that if we start having these conversations, we don't know how to contain them. So if we talk about it, how do we close the conversation? How do we support someone? How do we give help? I don't have the right language. I don't have the words. I'm not the right person. And so our fear keeps us from having real and honest conversations because we're not certain about what we can do as human beings. But the second reason I think is even scarier is that sometimes we might fear that God has nothing to say about this topic and he has not
Mm,
provided for our challenges around mental illness. And so that's an even scarier thought than what I can do, wondering, well, what does God say about it and what can God do and does God care? And I
Sure.
think that is some of the fear as well.
Wow. Yeah. So maybe perhaps some of that is also tied into our culture, right? In your experience, so how do cultural backgrounds shape the way individuals may interpret, experience, or even respond to mental health challenges, including in the church culture, which you just talked about?
Yeah. Our experiences and our culture shapes everything. It is the lens at which we see the world. I've heard more times than I can count that mental illness is not a thing where I'm from. I've heard that more times. If I had a nickel for every time someone said that, I'd be I wouldn't have to go to work anymore. All right. And
Mhm.
so because our culture impacts how we see things, it really does delay folks coming into treatment. And even more than that, when people enter treatment, they have fears that treatment even will work for them or
Mhm.
treatment even an option for them. And especially for folks who come from a faith community where they've grown up or learned or this belief that all they need to do is pray in order to deal with some of these challenges that come with mental illness and mental health challenges. And so they feel like if they prayed and they still need to do something else, that their faith is weak. And
Mm.
so therein lies a problem. And people probably have heard this analogy, but you would never hear somebody talk about dealing with diabetes and saying all you need to do is pray, right? And
No.
not take the treatment or the health or the changes in lifestyle and health necessary to improve their life. I don't know, I have never heard anyone say that.
No.
But
No.
we are free to give out that wisdom and support when we're talking about depression and anxiety, right? And
Sure.
so therein lies a challenge is that prayer is everything. I believe it. And when we pray, God also offers support, treatment, all sorts of things in the form of human beings and health and medicine and all of those things. And so sometimes when we come from cultures where mental illness has only been talked about from that vein, folks really have a hard time engaging with treatment and they feel like their faith is weak, that they're not a strong person if they have to engage in treatment in some sort of way. So it kind of puts people in, we paint folks into a corner between
Yeah.
a rock and a hard place, right?
So a lot of this oftentimes damages people's sense of self. If what I'm dealing with is not recognized by the community that I'm a part of, right? What happens to someone's sense of self when they've sort of internalized the stigma that they've had to either hide or act like didn't exist for years or maybe even decades?
Yeah. There can be a lot of negative effects from how folks have internalized this stigma over the years. Some of it turns into self devaluation where they don't see a value in themselves. And this can be harmful because, again, it disconnects folks from community. And we need everyone. Everyone is valuable and important parts of our community. And so that is needed. It also can lead to believing that their mental illness keeps them from being capable of doing things and serving and helping others, which is a challenge. Also, this same internalized stigma creates that cycle where folks will not go into treatment and may not go into treatment because of the belief that nothing can help them because they've internalized this so long. You may have heard, and people listening and watching, this idea of learned helplessness
Mm,
that can come along with this. And so once someone learns that they are only helpless and they cannot get help or be helped or be a help to others, it just it creates a huge loss within our
yeah.
community because everyone is needed and
Yeah.
valued.
That is so powerful. That's so powerful. Listen, um, uh, because we have you on, I want to tap into some of your clinical background, and I want to talk to you about sort of the science of it all. If we, because I think sometimes with information, it helps with the destigmatization that we need to happen. The more people understand about challenges that people are going through. So, if we shift to science, what does neuroscience teach us about
Yeah.
mental illness that can help sort of dismantle some of these older myths or even other myths that we feel or misconceptions?
Yeah, I think this is an important question because it's good to know that science really backs up a lot of what we've talked about already today. So, we know now that there are effective ways to challenge or deal with mental illness and mental health problems. Brain biology is pretty much the foundation of some of this knowledge that we have. And so we know about neurotransmitters and brain structural differences and how our brain circuitry works. And having that knowledge aids us with the treatment of depression, anxiety, and multiple other mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, um, post traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and all of that knowledge goes into the treatments that are made. Not just the medical treatments, but also that understanding helps with creating some of these evidence-based psychological treatments, which include cognitive behavior therapy. We know how we can change how folks think. Um, Other therapies like, my brain. Dialectical behavior therapy, where
Sure.
people get skills, learn skills, and then learn how to interact in society in better ways. All of these things are based in neuroscience and things that we know about our brain chemistry and our brain circuitry. We also know a lot about genetics and environment and how stress and trauma and social support can shift or change our experiences in the world. And this gives us good evidence around how we can aid people in making their own changes in where they show up, the spaces that they're in, so that they can have longer term benefits around their own, improving their own mental health over time. So,
Yeah.
those are some of the things I think are really helpful for folks to know.
Yeah, and that is awesome. If we had more time, I would ask you so many more questions about that. But we do have someone that's coming on to talk about trauma and the linkages of trauma to the body. But
Yeah.
that's also something else that I think is very important. There is some generational stuff that comes along with the trauma that we as that Black and Brown people have experienced, that has been passed on to us. That is also linked to our neurobiology.
Yeah.
So all these things are very important. But let's sort of tick the task. And
Okay.
sometimes, Dr. Holder, institutions like healthcare systems or even schools unintentionally can sometimes reinforce um, stigma, right? What policies or habits do you feel we need to unlearn? Not just us as a conference dealing with churches, but also, we also educate. What are some of the things that we need to unlearn so that we can make people feel more welcomed and inclusive?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I like to think of it in terms of how do we create some fail safes within the systems that we belong to that can aid us in learning better. One of which is making sure that we integrate mental health education into curriculums in our schools, but we can also integrate it into how we talk about things within our churches as well. And this will provide this opportunity for people to see how these challenges can be met by the loving care and guidance that we have through scripture, but also within our school systems, helping people understand what well-being really looks like so that we can live out a lot of fundamentals that are really important to our faith. The other thing I think is really important is that
Hmm.
when we have folks who are teaching, preaching, and guiding folks, we want to have them have effective training around just general mental health knowledge. They don't have to be a clinician to be able to see signs and symptoms
Yeah.
and be able to make sure that in our institutions, we also have good places that we can send people to have those conversations so that our teachers, preachers, anyone who's in a leadership role, when they notice something, they can have a conversation and say, hey, I noticed X, Y, and Z. I'm concerned. And guess what? I have a resource. I want to connect you with this person so you can unpack that and talk more and get what you need moving forward. We are often, and just people in general, not just church folk, but in general, often afraid to have conversations because we're afraid, well, maybe there's nothing wrong at all, and maybe there's not, but early intervention and often
Mm.
intervention is the best intervention.
Yep.
I'd rather have a conversation with someone who's barely had a challenge than someone who's been steeped in it for a very long time and we're looking for a ton of resources. The earlier we can implement support, the better off we can. So with that unlearning, we have to really unlearn being silent and unlearn ignoring signs, because we see stuff and be like, maybe it's nothing. No, don't say that. Have that conversation, right?
Mhm.
I think these things are really important for building stronger communities.
This is so good. This is so good. Um, uh, can you define? So this isn't one of the questions I sent, but can you define well-being for us? Like, what is well-being? Like, because I'm only asking because you're a chief well-being officer, and you
Yeah,
just mentioned it. And I was like, well, people don't even know what well-being is. What does
yeah.
being well mean?
What? So, from my perspective,
Uh huh.
well-being is about sustaining life at a level that allows us to experience joy, health, and a sense of purpose long term. There are 8 dimensions of well-being that I like to talk about, and
Yeah.
I'm sure we don't have time to get into all of that, but each of those areas impacts everything in our life. There's not one area that doesn't impact everything else. And so, for individuals to be self reflective about what we need just to exist in the world, and then figuring out how do we elevate that so that we're not just existing, but we have places in our lives where we're thriving, and a community that we can both give support to and a
Mhm.
community that we're receiving support, because both are necessary.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so we're winding down a little bit here. So for for the person that's watching, who feels either isolated or dismissed or misunderstood, what are some things that you would like to say to them, to sort of encourage them?
Yeah. So, someone who's watching, if you're watching this and you feel stigmatized or unseen or misunderstood, I want you to know, number one, that you are valuable. You are valuable, and your well being matters not just for yourself, but it matters for everyone in your community. Think of ourselves as like a drop in a pond. And when you drop water into a pond, it ripples. And so each of us has value, just not just to ourselves, but our entire community. And we have value to God. So you have value to God as well. I would like to encourage you that you are worthy of all the support and resources that you can take hold of. So take hold of them. You are worthy of time that it takes to learn and to grow, and that any mental illness or mental health challenge you are experiencing does not define you as a person. You are so much more than that one aspect of yourself. And so I want you to feel encouraged to continue your journey, because you're necessary and you're needed just as you are now, and that there is hope for things to improve over time with the connections within your community and using resources and support.
Dr. Holder, you are so incredibly awesome, and I want to thank you for taking the time to share with our constituents. But for those of us who want to participate in real change, right? Um, from your perspective, What does real cultural change around mental health look like? And sort of how can each of us sort of participate in real cultural change? So, from your perspective, what does a truly stigma free, supportive environment sort of look like? And then how can we each participate in creating that environment?
Yeah. I think it's really simple. I think a stigma free environment starts with us taking good care of the people who are already in our circle of influence. If we take a moment and think, every one of us knows someone who has a mental health condition, mental health illness, or is struggling emotionally or psychologically in some way. And if each of us makes ourselves a committee of one and says, you know what? Number one, I can start by destigmatizing my language. Number two, I can start by making sure I know the resources in my community. What resources exist for people? And number three, taking a little bit time, maybe just to learn a little bit more than I knew before. All of us can do that. And even if we are the ones who are struggling, those three things can aid us in connecting better with those around us. And I believe once those linkages are made and we each do that, we it builds over time. And so, oftentimes we want to think about these big, huge ventures that we can do to change the world. But what we forget is that each of us is a member of the community that we want to change. And so, as we make those small changes, we are changing the community or the culture in which we're in. And so, starting small and being very mindful and reflective about what we want to see in the world and making small steps to do that by connecting with the people around us that we already have influence and connection to, I think can go a long way. Imagine if we all did that, right? It would
Absolutely.
go a long way, a long way.
Yeah. Dr. Hoda, I want to thank you so very much for coming and for sharing and for unpacking the myths and misconceptions about mental illness. For those of you who are looking for someone to come into your spaces to help you deal and navigate with some of these issues, listen, I don't know if you can get Dr. Holder on your schedule. I don't know if she'll be willing to come. She may be able to be willing to come, but by all means, she is a resource, and I hope you all use her. Dr. Holder, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for having this impactful conversation with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.